start. Thank you for attending another Quibuca Café Littéraire. This one is in English, of course. Today, the discussion will be about genocide perpetrators and their accomplices with you, Dr. Andrew Wallis. I'm gonna share your biography for those who don't know you, especially because we will be sharing this discussion on Quibuca website, YouTube. So Andrew Wallis is an academic, author, and journalist. He gained his doctorate from the University of Cambridge, where he taught the history of the Great Lakes. He is the author of 2 books on the genocide against the Tutsi, Silent Accomplice, the untold story of the role of France in the Rwandan genocide against the Tutsi, and Steeped in Blood, Akazu and the Architects of the Rwandan genocide against the Tutsi. He has written for a wide range of UK and worldwide publications, including The Times, The Guardian, USA Today, thisworld.org, CS Monitor, OpenDemocracy.net, The New Times, and Rwandan, Ugandan, and South African radio and television. He is an expert analyst on Great Lake issues. More recently, he founded a new online website, we're going to talk about that later, and resource that campaigns for justice for the victims of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. The name of the website is Rwanda Justice for Genocide .org.uk. So, dear Andrew Wallis, why did you choose to write a book about the Akazu, and what was the process and difficulties you came across in writing a book on such a controversial subject?
First, can people hear me? Yes. Brilliant. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you so much for asking me. It's been a few years since either book came out, but I like to think it's even more relevant today, what is inside those books. So I'm going to talk really about Akazu, and what surprised me, I think, when I did the first book, which is about the role of France, the complicity of France in the genocide, was I was coming across these figures, such as Agathe, Habyarimana, and her brothers, and her family, and these military figures. And yet, there didn't seem to be much information out there. You could Google them, of course. You could read Alison Deforge's book or Rakia Omar's. But really, what did we know about them? What did we know about why, when they grew up as children, they never probably thought they were going to end up responsible for the murder of 1 million Tutsis in this country? What made them mass murderers? How did they get involved? And then I sort of decided, well, this in itself was a very important subject, because after all, you would probably agree, if you have no perpetrator, you have no crime. And this is, of course, today so relevant when we have genocide denial rising rapidly, certainly in the West. People say, well, we don't know who these were. You know, we've never heard of Bagosora. We've never heard of Zerera, Zengiumva. And so, you know, if you can't point out who did it, well, clearly there was nothing they did. So I think it's very important to put names to faces. And then you put a name and a face and a background and a motivation and a reason. Because they always say, you know, there's a motivation for a crime. You don't go out one day and commit a genocide. And the important thing about the Akazu, I suppose the most important thing I took away, is this was a crime that took years in preparation. This was not spontaneous, as they said. during the genocide when they're already making their excuses. This was a crime that, to understand, you had to go back to 1973 when these guys took power. And in fact, you have to go back further into the early 60s. And in fact, if you want to go back even further, you can go all the way back to 1894, 1896. And you see history repeating. The coup in 1896 is repeated in 1973, is repeated in 1994. It's the same actors. Kanjagira, the fabled queen who murdered her own stepson in order to get her son in power. Well, fast forward 100 years, you have Agat, Abiramana, and her brother Zed. So history is repeating. In 1963, as we know, there was genocidal pogroms here. Belgium supported the government. The international community looked the other way. The church looked the other way. 30 years on, what do we have? Exactly the same. History repeats itself. So for those, and I'm a historian, so I'm biased, but I would say history tells us about the present and the future, because it does repeat, because we don't learn from it. And it is a fool, I think, and all of us are fools at times, because we just sleepwalk into these events. So let me just say something very briefly about putting the book together, because you will see a very big book. And I was just saying to Ali here, I cannot believe I actually wrote this enormous thing. And if it makes you feel any better, it was double this size before I started editing it. So there's about 10 chapters which I had to leave out because my publisher refused to get involved. It was an enormous undertaking, because when you go into looking at history, you have to persuade people to talk. You have to persuade witnesses, and some of them are perpetrators, and some of them are survivors who both have good reason not to talk. Some of them are politicians, and as we know, politicians hate talking, especially if they're involved in something. Or military, they don't want to talk either. Or judges, or lawyers, client confidentiality. So there's a million reasons people didn't want to talk to me. Trying to persuade them was very tricky, and I'm so grateful to see some individuals here who helped me on this road to persuading, which was so important. So the road was a long one. I spent a fair amount of time going backwards and forwards to the ICTR and sitting in on trials and verdicts and speaking to lawyers there. Sitting in courts in France, in the Magistrates' Court in London, here in Kigali, trying to talk to perpetrators in prisons around the country, trying to sit in archives. If anyone's ever sat in an archive, they know what a proposition it is. You're not quite sure, you're looking for a needle in a haystack. Maybe after a whole week, you've just got one sentence in a book. You found one fact that's relevant. You're paging through thousands of pages of dusty old documents. A lot of them in this country, sadly, had not been looked after, had been lost. People didn't really know what was there. It's not like a Google search. You put in a search term and up pops perpetrator, he did this. You've got to delve through boxes of papers, and you might strike lucky. And that might lead you on to the next archive, the next source. And then, of course, if you go to Arusha and you're trying to deal with the archives of the International Court, that's a whole other game. They've got all the facts and the figures. It's just they don't like showing them to anyone. So you get big sheets of paper and they've just put black lines through all the names for data protection. Or they say, this police report is off limits. You can't see that. Or that judgment is off limits. That's only for lawyers. So it's like they don't actually have the item, which is also very frustrating. So the archives is an issue. Obviously, for the genocide in 1994, there is very little audio or visual. The TV of the world media was not here. It was in South Africa with Nelson Mandela, or it was in America following the O.J. Simpson trial. Sadly, the genocide against Tutsi was not significant enough as a world event for anyone to come here and actually spend some media time and coverage. It was only the camps in July, when the refugees fled into the camps, that was suddenly big television, and the world media got interested. So that was an issue. So what you're trying to do with the book, and I try to do, whether it's successful or not, those who read it can tell me, is not to write a very dull, long history of Rwanda, but to fill it with stories, because what I wanted to do was to follow these figures, Agathe and her brothers, and all these sort of mafia group around of the Akazu, and to follow them through their school days, to follow them when they came into power in 73. And 1973, it's like they won the lottery. Suddenly these people with, Zed was a pretty much a failed secondary school teacher. Suddenly he's thrust into being prefect of Kibuye and then Ruhengeri. You've won the lottery. You've gone from nowhere to somewhere to someone. So that's the question for me, is following these characters through, but building their lives up through stories and trying to understand where they got to in 94, and then continuing the story, not stopping in 94 as a lot of books do, as if it's done and dusted. The genocide stops in 94, but to continue to follow them. Where are they today? Because that's what we want to know. That's what I want to know. What's the end of the story? And of course, some are in prison. Some are living happy retirements in France and in Belgium and places. So there's a life story. We all have life stories. This is the life story of the people who carried out the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi.
And can you explain a little about Akazu, who and what it was, and also its importance?
Okay, I've probably said a little bit about it already. Let's go back then. Yeah. How would I say, and I know there's people who know a lot more than me about Akazu, but I always think of it as a small mafia which grew into a very large mafia. And imagine a mafia group running your country. Rwanda became really two governments. There was the official government, which was the one the international bodies saw, the World Bank saw, the President of America saw, the President of France saw. All handshakes and Armani suits. And then there was this parallel network, this mafia group. The same figures, but this time they were working not for the good of the Rwandan people. This time they were working purely for their own wealth and power. And it was built around this small family group. As we say, Akazu literally is a little house. Some would also call it Le Clan de Madame, meaning Agathe Habyarimana, the clan of hers, her family. Christophe Mfizi has also called it Network Zero, with Z in zero standing for Ziggy Musha Z, the brother of Agathe. So it's been called different names, and it was not actually termed Akazu until the late 80s. But it was already in the early 90s, if you would use the word Akazu here, you were in trouble. It was known what you were talking about, and certainly it was a term that these individuals didn't like. But the important thing was it covered every part of Rwandan society. I mean, can you imagine that? The church leaders appointed by these people, the business people with any power appointed by these people, the prefets, the burgmeisters, the cell leaders. all the way down through every part of society, administration, the military. If you wanted to almost any business, you had to have an Akazu figure at some level who was your benefactor. If you wanted to get anywhere. So it meant if you were from the south, or if you were a Tutsi, your chances of getting on in society were pretty small. If you were from Gisenyi, Bushiru, where this presidential family came from, your chances of getting on are really quite good, because you almost certainly you knew these figures. So it did mean that society became hugely divided. And how good a society is that going to be when certain people, certain players are completely dismissed just because where they come from, the regionalist element, which is not known about very much or talked about, or obviously for Tutsis up until 1990, really they were invisible. It was almost impossible to get to university, almost impossible to get a good education, because you were pushed over. Those places always went to those, usually from the north, who had these contacts. So Akazu took power in 1973, I would say. Well, I say Akazu, it wasn't Akazu then, it was just Habyarimana. It was a so-called bloodless coup. That was how it was sold to the international community. He seized power. Within 2 or 3 years, the previous government had disappeared. And I mean disappeared. Most of them had disappeared into Ruangeri prison, never to be seen again. The former president had disappeared into his house in Gitarama. He's buried in the garden there, along with his wife, both murdered. So this bloodless coup, in fact, was extremely bloody. It was just done behind the scenes. The international community knew about it, turned the other way. The church knew about it, turned the other way, which unfortunately we see time and again. In fact, within just 7 years, by 1980, there was a coup attempt against Habyarimana. He was getting so unpopular, the corruption was sort of out of control already. These Akazu had already angered so many people. However, Habyarimana got wind of this. The people who led the coup were, one fled, one was arrested. And it fizzled out. And then you get what I call the golden years of Akazu, 1980 to 1990. There was no resistance. They slowly took over society. They took over the church. A Tutsi bishop was made a bishop, or a Tutsi was made a bishop, and then he was unmade it when they found out what his ethnic background was. And the Vatican went along with this. It's quite remarkable. So really they had their own way in everything. There was one possible leadership contender, a man called Colonel Mayuya, who was one of the few very upright, good, solid, professional soldiers in an otherwise very corrupt army. Sadly, he too was murdered in 1988 by Akazu because they saw him as a threat to their power. So in 1990, suddenly these golden years come to an abrupt end. The economy dives. The RPF invade. Multi-party power sharing comes. And Akazu really, for the first time, they're thrown back. Agat has to decide what is going on here. Our power is really threatened. And the next 3 or 4 years are marked by genocidal pogroms. As we know, the genocide to me does not start in 1994. You talk to victims at Bugesera or Kibalira or the other sites where genocide took place in 1990, 91, 92, 93. And they're often forgotten. These crimes, sadly, were never investigated. The international community issued a report saying they'd happened, but there was no investigation. Akazu got away with those, and they were really the start. They set the scene. And then, as we know, what happened in 1994. And interestingly, some Akazu stayed here and took part. Some fled abroad, where they continued to support. And in the years following, we saw immediately after, a lot of them went to neighboring countries where they attempted to build up a new power base and to use this army the French had allowed to go into Zaire without disarming it. And certainly if you were living here, as some may have done, in late 1994, 95, we sit here now as it's one of the what-ifs of history, but we just assumed the RPF won. We assumed that the new government was going to stay in power. Well, if you were here in late 94, 95, that was certainly not a done deal, because on the border, if you can imagine on the border of your country, you've got 40,000 heavily armed men. They've got Colonel Gaddafi of Libya arming them. They've got Omar Bongo Gabon arming them. They've got arms coming in from Zaire. So the ex-Rwandan military of Bagasora, Bizimungu, were in those camps fully intent on coming back in here. There were genocidal attacks back into the country in 1994, 95, 96. So it was a very close-run thing, I think, that we are sitting here today not in a state of post-genocide horror. Then we're sitting today safe and secure and looking forward. But obviously moving forward there, where do Akazu go? Well, a lot of them went to big houses in Nairobi, Agat and Zed and Kabuga. You know, they took all the money they stole from this country, which was most of it, and they set up life in exile. A lot of them went to Cameroon, West Africa, and enjoyed good lives for a time. The International Court was set up in Arusha, and slowly arrests started to be made. And at which point, a lot of them decided they were safer in Europe, where human rights laws protected them, good lawyers protected them, apathy or politics, in the case of France and Belgium, protected them, or coming to the UK will come on later, where we never take action against anyone who has committed genocide, so that obviously protects you as well. So you get impunity. So there we are. That's a brief overview of Akazu, the rise and the fall of this group. But I think it's hugely important that they are not forgotten, because in forgetting them, we forget the crime that they took part, or they made happen, really. So that's a long answer to a short question, sorry.
It's not that long. We will go back to that, because let's not forget youth is watching also, and we have to really explain how they were organized. Why are trials for genocide and war crimes still so important today?
Trials. Okay, this is one of my bugbears, having attended a lot of them. ICTR trials especially. One of my issues, the sort of the worst days of your life, if you can imagine attending a judgment in Arusha. And if you went to the war crime, I don't know, has anyone here been to ICTR or attended? Brilliant. Well, you know, there you go. I've got a fan club at the back there. Tremendous. Tom was there several times. Brilliant. Well, did you attend any judgments? No, verdicts. Oh, you missed. Okay, judgments. So picture the scene, and I'll show you a little clip in a minute, if we can get this to work. There you are. You've got, for the sake of asking, who should we have in the dock? Well, let's have Bagasora. We all know Bagasora, the architect of it all, and his sort of friend in evil, Anatole Zengyumva, the so-called butcher of Gisenyi, who managed to clear the whole Gisenyi region of Tutsis quickest. It's a claim to fame. So they're sitting in the dock. In the public gallery, which is a sort of corridor almost, with a glass compartment, so you can look into the court, you can see them, they can see you, but there's no hearing, obviously. And you wear your little earpieces so you can hear what's going on. I'm sitting there, and all the places to the left, there's about 10, 15, 20, are all supporters of Bagosora and Zengiumva. There's family members, there's previous accused who have managed to get out, get off, get reduced sentences, who are now free. Basically, it's a whole collection of Akazu and their supporters, giving a sort of power salute, you know, to the accused in the dock, and sort of whooping and getting excited when the verdicts came in, that they'd, in Zengiumva's case, had his verdict remarkably reduced from life to 15 years, and then freedom straight away because he'd served that already. Even he couldn't believe it. But it's one of those times where you think you must be in a parallel universe. You think, how is this possible? How is this justice here? And it took place 1,000 miles away in Arusha. So no one here saw it. It was not on television because the internet was so poor in the court. So no one knew about it. So justice was not seen, and justice, I would say, was denied. So overall, a pretty poor experience. And to make matters worse, well, I mean, I'll give you another little story. Too many stories, but here we go. I was given a tip-off one evening. I was told after another judgment, Justin Mugenzi, a particularly unpleasant individual who murdered his first wife, and that was back in the late 70s, before he got on to what he did during the genocide. And Prosper Mugenzi, thank you, who was another minister. They had both had 30-year trial sentences overturned on appeal, released by a particularly controversial judge who tended to release a lot on appeal, Theodore Meron. I was given a tip-off. They were having a celebratory party. And I actually put this story in the book, but I'll just recount it because it's one of those, another surreal moment in life. So I went along to this sort of cafe bar in downtown Arusha, playing the card of being a sort of stupid and rather ignorant British backpacker, something a role I'm quite good at. So I sat there and watched while the room filled up with Zed and Zengiumva and all these other guys who'd been released on appeal or sentences had finished or whatever. And then about 10 o'clock, 10:30, in came the successful duo. Mugenzi marched in, big smile on his face. The defense attorneys marched in. They put on Queen's We Are the Champions. There was champagne all round. It was just like a sort of celebration. If you can think of all the defendants at Nuremberg having a party, having got released, that's what it felt like. And you're sort of sitting in there thinking, what is going on here? This is international justice. And hearing these victory celebrations with Mugenzi saying, what is this? What is this so-called genocide of the Tutsis? There was no genocide. The Hutus never carried out any genocide. This is rubbish. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, really, this is international justice? This is what we paid $3 billion for? $3 billion for this? As a survivor said to me at Nyanza, he said, why didn't you just give us the $3 million, us survivors? Because really, you know, what have we achieved? So, but having given you that, let me give you another part of justice and trials and why I'm actually very keen on them, because I think, especially today, with denial going ballistic in the world, it's so important that we have these accused, again, names and faces. They're in the dock, you can see them. And more important, it gives the survivors a chance to look them in the eye and to say, you were the one who raped me. You were the one who killed my family. And that is so important. And even more important is that is then archived. That is on camera. That is written down forever. It is so difficult to deny a crime once it's been in a court and it's gone through that legal process of defense. It's been properly looked at. It's not someone's opinion. Lawyers of both sides have looked through it and a judgment has been given. So I think in terms of denial, it's so important these guys, even today, even as they're getting old, go on trial. Some would know Felicien Kabuga, the so-called financier of the genocide, the head of RTLM radio. He was finally found, as we know, in the middle of Paris, where he'd been living for several years. He was finally put on trial, and then late last year in August, halfway through, well, probably a third of the way through the trial, it was called off. His doctors argued he had dementia, and therefore it was unfair, he couldn't understand proceedings, and therefore he should be released. And the trial stopped, and that is what happened. That to me is really sad, but on the positive side, we do have some trial transcripts of the first half of the trial. We do have the site of Kabuga in the dock, so at least it's something. And we also have the world's press, just for a change, just for a few seconds, concentrate not on denial, which they spew out every day, but they actually talk about a perpetrator on trial, and that's really important to focus the world media if they can see these people. Because I think, to me, that's what the ICTR got really wrong, is no one saw these trials. Rwandans couldn't see it because it wasn't in their country. The international community couldn't see it because there was such poor internet and media that, unlike the ICTY in The Hague, judging the Bosnian war, that was all one click away. You could watch that. You could watch the proceedings against Milosevic, but you couldn't see the proceedings against Bagosora. And so they've been lost to history, and their crimes have been lost. So trials are important, and they must, I think, keep going. I mean, Germany has recently put a 103-year-old man on trial. Now, you might say, it's 103 years old, really? Really, does that really help justice, putting a 103-year-old man on trial? But I would argue, yes, it does, because it's not about him. It's about a much wider issue going forward. When this man is being judged, guilty or not guilty, going forward another generation, people can look back and they can read about everything that went on, which the trial will throw up. All the witnesses will talk about not just what he did, but about, how Auschwitz worked. Much wider issues. So for me, it's about the person, but it's about the crime, and we shouldn't forget that. So it's one reason, as we'll probably say with the next bit, which is probably around the failure of the UK, why trials are something that we need to be pushing our governments to keep happening, even if they're old, even if the alleged perpetrator is an old man, and they are old men now. And sadly they are dying. In the case of Kabuga, he got off before because of dementia. In France, for example, we had the case of the prefet of Gikongoro, Lucien Brucia-Bruta. And we waited more than 2 decades to get him on trial in Paris. Finally, we got him on trial. Finally, he was convicted of genocide. And then within a week, he was released because they said he was too old and prison wasn't the right place for him. And about a year later, he died. So justice again was delayed, and justice again was, sadly, I think, denied. I mean, it's good that he was on trial. It was good that he had to look survivors in the face. And it's good that there's a huge amount of new information came out because of that trial. But in terms of that particular case, it shows we're fighting every day that goes past now. And these are cars who are not on trial, to me, is one day too many. These cases are taking 10 years, 20 years to come to court. Then the court cases are taking forever. So, sadly, a lot of Nazi perpetrators died in their beds. And the way we're going, the same is going to be true in Rwanda. So we need to keep pushing, keep pressing our individual ministers, politicians, that this is what we need. At least, that is my opinion.
And you're right, because I saw myself, Félicien Kaboga, entering the Paris courts, his fist in the air. He wasn't scared at all. Thank you. So my next and final question before the Q&As. You have recently set up a new campaign website that aims to keep the world updated on the international trials, justice, and the genocide against the Tutsi, and especially the failure of the United Kingdom to bring 5 suspects there to justice. Can you explain a little bit about what you hope to achieve and why justice is still being denied?
Okay, thank you. This is one of my latest sort of post-book projects, really, if it's a project. You may or may not know, is anyone here from the UK? Is it just me? I feel I'm the lone Brit. I feel like Brexit has taken place. Yes, wonderful, wonderful. Don't be afraid to put your hand up. I know it's embarrassing saying you're British. And most of the time I feel embarrassed about it, especially on this subject. But yeah, yes. No, it is a sad, sad state of affairs that of all the countries in the world, probably the UK is right up there with impunity. It's sort of, despite Boris Johnson saying that we take genocide very seriously, if you don't have a single genocide trial in 80 years, how serious do you think you're taking it? After the Second World War, the British government in 1947, 2 years after the war, we imported a whole regiment of Waffen-SS. That's 7,000 men to the UK because we needed coal miners. We were meant to screen them because we knew a lot of them had been involved in the Holocaust, but we didn't. 40 years later, it was pointed out to us by Simon Wiesenthal, the Nazi hunter, that dozens of these individuals who were complicit in the murder of tens of thousands of Jews were living happy lives in the UK. And we didn't even have any laws to do anything about it. We then had 5 years to push through some war crimes legislation so we could do something. And at the end of all of that, most of these Nazis were now 80s or 90s, and most of them then died in their beds. We managed one trial. We didn't manage a single trial for genocide, but we managed one conviction for war crimes, and the individual himself died 4 years later because he was in his late 80s. Since then, that was 2000, in the past 24 years, guess what? Not a single trial. Does that mean the UK has not a single war criminal or genocide suspect in there? I think not. In fact, we have 5 Rwandans, genocide suspects. They came over in the late 90s, and they've been living fairly happily ever since. There was an attempt to extradite them, but the British government said this was not a safe country to send them to in terms of getting a proper trial. Interesting. However, there was then allegedly a police investigation, which I'm told is ongoing, and certain people in the room can probably tell you more about that, but it is ongoing. Will it lead to anything? Again, one of the men the suspect has had a stroke and is unwell, and I suspect his defense lawyer will say he's unfit. So every day that goes past is another day justice is delayed and denied. It's a sad state of affairs in the UK, and I do feel quite embarrassed sitting here at Kwabuka 30, you know, as a resident of the UK, knowing that my government just doesn't seem to see the crime of genocide as being important. If I commit a parking violation, I will be prosecuted. If my dog produces a lot of mess on the pavement, I will be prosecuted. If I commit genocide in another country, I will get impunity. What does that say about the politicians in charge of our country and our legal system? And yet, we will, of course, point the finger at all the other countries in the world and say, your justice system is not so good. Your trials are not fair. Your lawyers are not very good. The word hypocrisy does come to mind. You can judge yourselves whether that is one that is right and proper. But having said all of that, so I have a website which I might attempt to show you now. Please bear with me while we attempt to. No, I may not be. Okay, bear with me while this happens. What's also important is trials going on around the world. So as you may know, in France, there was a conviction just before Christmas. In Brussels as well, just before Christmas. So slowly, these cases are taking place. But if you think of the amount of genocidaires still out there, it is very slow progress. And as I said, they are all getting old, and their excellent lawyers are using every trick in the book to stop them coming into the dock. The good news is when they do come in the dock, all of them are being convicted, which is saying something. It's remarkable. I'm not sure there's been a single individual in a European court who has not been convicted. Do you want to hold on? Is it connected to the internet? We just talk among yourselves for a second. Has anyone got any questions from any of what I've said so far while we're
or any
our Web
comments?
Genius? Comments, questions? Have I stunned you all into silence? How about the ICT lobby at the back? Would you like to tell us all about your experience of ICTR? I'm sure you would. There must be some positivity there, which I'm desperate to feed into. Were you visiting or were you working? Just visiting? Just visiting Arusha, or were you just... ICTR tourist? Wow, that sounds like a lot of pain. You'd think you'd want to walk up Mount Kilimanjaro, but as a better thing to do. Tom, you are always good for a comment, so I'm going to hand the microphone to you, and you can make a comment, given that you are also responsible for this book. So,
thank you, Andrew. My voice is not very good. For those who have stepped in blood, the story he was telling me about Justin Mugenzi and denying the genocide is on page 557. Page 557. Whereby he said, if you see the quote, you understand why the choice of the music we are the champions. Their denial had succeeded to convince some people that what they are doing can be done away with impunity. Andrew, I think one of the members of Akazu, actually from the inner circle, who was tried in France is Pascal Simbikangwa. Simbikangwa was not someone who was so high in the rank, was a captain, but he had a lot of influence on Habyarimana. One good example is a letter he wrote to the president. Actually, it was a memo, a big memo, and it was used in his trial. I'm the one who gave it to them. Imagine someone who would recommend, you remove this minister is corrupt, you should transfer this colonel to somewhere, take so-and-so to Russia, remove him from the ministry, and Simbikangwa was so powerful, and he managed, of course, to evade justice. He lived in a reunion for several years before he sneaked to France, and they got him there. The rest, I think, I would recommend this book because I think I read it 5 years ago. Yes, it was out 5 years ago. A book with end notes are more than 100 pages. I think it's from page 591 to 690 something. A lot of details, a lot of pictures, a lot of names. It's next to Death, Despair, and Defiance. If I would see books with details on the genocide, it's Steeped in Blood and Death, Despair, and Defiance.
Thank you, Tom. That's very kind. So this sort of says everything really for me. As I've just said, I believe the UK is now a haven for genocide. I think there's certainly over 800 suspected mass murderers now from all over the world. The British, the American, Canadian media are just not interested in reporting it. So what I've tried to do is to put all these trials which have happened around the world, and if we press on timeline, for example, now it is very small, so you might have to look at this later, but what I've tried to do, these are the 5 suspects in the UK. Vincent Brown, who changed his name to, he was Vincent Virginia, Vincent Brown, Charles Munyaneza, Emmanuel Tezieo, Celestine Ugarishuba, and Celestine Mutabaruka. Celestine Mutabaruka, by the way, has made himself a bishop more recently. He founded his own church and swiftly moved through the ranks, and he's now made himself a bishop, so he could be an archbishop by the time this actually comes out. Now, if I can manage to move this up or down, how do I do that? There we go. So there we go. There we are, the genocide, 1994. So what I've tried to do is to put their background. What were these individuals doing? 2 were mayors, MRND, 3 were mayors, in fact. Sorry, 1 was a doctor. 1 was working as a forest management project. All of them highly educated. The plane crash. And then what happens? Well, this is where international justice kicks in or doesn't kick in. They've arrived in the UK. In 2000, Denmark has arrested an individual. France has arrested an individual. Belgian court in 2001 makes these first 4 sentences, including 2 Catholic nuns. And then as you go through the years, you'll see slowly other countries, the international community, the USA, Belgium again with two more cases. And again, what's happening in Britain? Nothing. Really, they're going through the extradition, it starts, it fails, they try another extradition, it starts and fails. Meanwhile, internationally, we've got more Finland sentences an individual. The USA doesn't put them on trial, it deports. So as we go through Canada and various other countries, Sweden, and still in the UK, we've got extradition cases which are going nowhere. 2017, 2018, Sweden, Belgium, Kabuga's arrested. The British police have finally, in 2019, started an investigation. We go through 2021, there's yet more cases, especially America, again, Sweden, continent. France has now started to put cases on trial. Again, nothing in the UK. So I think it's important that the timeline to see how international justice has treated the Rwandan genocide in 30 years. And this sort of puts it into your mind. You sort of see how it's working, or should we say not working, in certain cases. And if we fast forward to today, so there we have, that I am aware of, countries that have deported, extradited alleged genocide perpetrators to face trial in Rwanda, UN, USA, Canada, Denmark, Netherlands, Norway, Germany, Sweden, Finland. Countries that have held trials in the national courts, Belgium, France, Sweden, Finland, Germany, Netherlands, the UN. Countries that had neither extradited nor put on trial in their own courts, UK and Italy. As of June 2023, we have still over 1,000 international indictments, arrest warrants out. These are not for small players. These are for senior level individuals. And then we go on, we can look at the list of the various countries and who has been tried. So that's what I've tried to do with the timeline. If you want to know a bit more about the actual genocide suspects in the UK, for example, Celestine Mutaburuka, you can read about his early life, you can read about his allegations, where he committed his offences. You can read about his life in the UK afterwards, which usually involves very good lawyers. I think the British taxpayers paid out over £4 million. They tend to hire the very best lawyers there are, which is fine, of course, it is their right. Current genocide cases. If we look, this particular chap, Fulgence Kayashima, he's sort of gone under the radar, but he was the most wanted individual. He was arrested in South Africa last year. He is said to have taken part with the priest Anastase Saromba in knocking down the church on his parishioners. Over 2,000 were killed. He is fighting extradition, of course. He was in a court in Cape Town last month, and proceedings were adjourned as ever. If he does stand trial, it will be in Arusha. And thankfully, he's still a youngish man, so with a bit of luck, he will actually stand trial. Australia, interestingly, just at Christmas time, 2 suspects were tracked down by the Australian media. It's interesting, it's always the media who track these individuals down. In the UK, all 5 were tracked down by the media. It's not by your immigration, not by the police, it's the media who are exposing them. Our 7 individuals, including Musia Z, you may be aware that when they were released in Arusha, they went to a safe house because no country wanted them. They, of course, they are citizens of Rwanda. They can come back here anytime they want, but they don't want to. So the UN put them up in a very nice safe house. They had medical expenses all paid for. They had psychological physiotherapy, basically everything they wanted, a chauffeur. A couple of years ago, a deal was done with Niger, and they moved to Niger. There were 8 of these individuals, including Zengiumva, the butcher of Gisenyi. And they are still in Niger, trying to get to another country, trying really to get France or Belgium to give them the right to stay there. France and Belgium so far seem reluctant, as do any other country. Quite amazingly, though, the UN says it has a duty of care to them. And so every Christmas it gives them $10,000. A duty of care to the perpetrators of this crime, or some of them are certainly perpetrators. And yet the survivors get nothing. It seems to be a strange world where we reward the criminal and, unfortunately, the survivor gets nothing. So, and going down, obviously, we've got the cases from Christmas, Bazabose, Twahira, really shocking cases in Belgium. Twahira, the sexual offences really came into the limelight. It's an absolutely evil man of the first order with what he did. The butcher Tumba in Paris, finally, and of course we have Kabuga. So I've tried to put in various cases and to, as the case goes through, to write about it. So what we want to do is to put names to faces. We want to put acts to faces. We want perpetrators to come out of those shadows and back into the limelight, or at least that's the hope, and get people talking about them again. And then we can start perhaps pushing back on some of this genocide denial that's going on. So I think that's probably enough of that. Thank you very much.
I want to comment on the website. Excuse me. It's very important to have such brilliant website with accurate information for those people who are going to visit and see and read and be educated. I was invited last November to give a talk to students at University of Columbia. And before going there, when I was preparing my presentation, I visited the website of the teacher who invited me to see what she had. Okay, sorry. She has on the website, and really, I was so disappointed because the information, you know, in some universities, and especially now in post-COVID context, students learn remotely. And so the teachers have their website, which is linked to the website of the university. So I visited the website of this person, and I was really astonished to see the information on the website. Okay, it was on Gachacha. Okay, it was on Gachacha, but really, false information, And then, okay, I prepared my presentation. I went there. I talked to the students, and the professor was there. And then, after my talk, I talked to the professor. And I said, I visited your website, and this is what I think. And the person agreed with me. So, and later on, I visited, it has been corrected. But today, when you visit some website, university website, organization website, on organization website, you will see sometimes sometimes they don't have the name of the author because it's the institution, right? But those texts have been written by the experts, on Rwanda. Huh? And when you read, sometimes you said, what was this? What's this? And so it's very important to have this, because some young people are misread because of the information which is not the correct information. So, and we need to, I don't know how we can do that, but we need to have a website like this, and we need to publish the articles or books, but to educate the young people across the world. So websites are one of the key channels to educate with accurate information. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. My name is Arnaud, and I got to read the book in 2019 or 2020, and I think I've been with a question since then about the book, and that will be my first one because I think I have two. Okay. My question about the book was how or why did the President Habyarimana regime fail to control Akazu? I mean, yes, there is, as you said, there was that mafia running the country behind the scenes. And as a young man, I still think about, and I still wonder on, how did they become too powerful to, to overrule the institutions? I mean, I think we need some of context. Two is about the trials of the people convicted of genocide at the international level. Looking at them, it looks like the international justice, the international communities, is going the hard way. Because looking at what Gacaca did, it was effective, efficient, but also less costly, if I can say. But looking at what the judgment have been at the International Court of Justice, it's the hard way, very expensive, but still not effective. And my question is, out of curiosity, who pays for that? What's their interest? Yeah.
Okay. Okay, look, the first question. I mean, the dynamic, I'm fascinated by Juvenal Habyarimana. And it's sad he has disappeared from history. Even more so that his plane went down on the 6th of April, and it's almost like his story stopped then. Everyone forgot him. We were then into the genocide. But people have forgotten this man. And without Habyarimana, you have, no 70s and no 80s, no Akazu, because he was at the heart of it. Obviously he was. But when he married, if you see pictures of him married to Agathe in 1962, this happy couple, he was then he was number 001. He was the very first officer in the new Rwandan army when they got independence. What did he have? He didn't have any money. He was a poor family, which actually had Ugandan roots. He married Agathe because she had the lineage. She had a so-called royal Hutu lineage. So it was a marriage of an up-and-coming officer who was obviously going to great things, and power and money, which Agathe gave him. And as you trace the marriage through, what becomes very clear is she is the one in charge, all the way through. I mean, Habyarimana has a number of mistresses, he has a number of illegitimate children. Agathe also allegedly has affairs here, there, and everywhere. It's not a very happy marriage, and it splinters to the point that it becomes clear, and witnesses have told me that in the early 90s, Habyarimana wants out. And you can't blame him. He's in this awful marriage, which he feels is ripping him apart. A wife he clearly doesn't love, and who is clearly in charge. He's got the RPF, who want him dead. He's got political opponents who want him dead. He's got his own army who want him dead. Really, he has no escape route. And as he tells a Belgian friend in April, just before the plane crash, he says, I want out. He didn't want to be here. He knew he was a dead man walking. He had had threats against his life. And I think we sort of forget that in the middle of all of this is a character. Now, I don't have much sympathy for him because he's red-lighted or green-lighted the massacres, the genocidal attacks of the 90s. And clearly he is a killer himself. But at the same time, there's a little bit of me thinks that here is a man who is totally cornered, that everyone had lost faith in him, the moderates, the extremists, and really he had nowhere to go in April 1994. And if you see pictures of him in the last 3 or 4 months of his life, he's suddenly gone grey. His face his hands are shaking, his whole face is pallid. And you compare that with the man of the late 80s and the golden years of this very upright, quite bravura character. It's quite remarkable. It's the same man. So the pressures on him were just quite intense. But I think he lost control at a very early days. I think, as the 70s go on, the coup in 1980, which nearly unseated him, was really stopped by a GATT. It was a GATT who actually took action against Lezinde, who was one of the coup leaders. Throughout the 80s, he's struggling to contain Zed. He's got Sagatwa. And as I said, if you ever see a picture, Sagatwa is always standing, this brother of Agatha is standing behind him, this sort of shadow figure. And he is warned about him. There's always a fear that Sagatwa is just going to put a bullet in his head, I think. I think he's just a figurehead in some respects. Yes, he does do what he does. But I think we have to look elsewhere for really who is controlling all of this. Sorry, and I've completely forgotten the second part of the question.
The second one is, who pays for it?
Oh, who pays for the ICTR? Oh, you do, of course. No, it's your taxes. It's all of us in this room. We've paid the $3 billion. And we're paying, each year when we're handing out $10,000 to these guys in Niger, that's your money. You'll be glad to know that you're also paying for their nice free housing and free medical accommodation and everything else. You have a duty of care to Anatole Zengiumva, at least the UN thinks, the butcher of Gisenyi. I can say no more.
Maybe to add on how Akazu was so powerful and bypassed Habyarimana as a president. He dies on the 6th. On the 9th, the wife, children, and many members of Akazu are taken by the French to Bangui. The sister of Habyarimana, who was just living somewhere close to, I think these days, it's in the backyard of Serena Hotel. Is taken to Habyarimana's house. They are left there, and another elder sister of Habyarimana. On the 11th, Habyarimana's siblings are not even flown to Gisenyi. They are driven through Bugesera, and then Gitarama, then to Gisenyi, where Habyarimana had been kept in the fridges of the breweries. They were just ignored. As soon as he died, his family disappeared, and they didn't care about him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the fascinating. I mean, I love all these anecdotes, but.
And another thing, for example, Anatolian Sengiyumva. You know when he started working close to Habyarimana, when he was a second lieutenant, And at that time, Habyarimana was a president, minister of defense, and the chief of staff for both gendarmerie, and they were only separated from the Minister of Defense in 1991 or 1992. So he was his assistant all that time, and was the inner member of the Akazu.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to note what happens to Habyarimana after he dies. You'd expect the loving family would take him back to Paris with them, because they get on the first plane back. But no, he's left here. And the poor guy is then dragged around Rwanda and then all around Congo. He ends up in a tea factory fridge. He then goes to the brewery fridge. Then he's shifted across the border to Goma. Then he ends up in a fridge in Kinshasa. Then he ends up, finally, he goes to Dabalite. Mobutu decides he'll give him a big burial in his sort of palatial jungle headquarters. But sadly, in 1996, when there's the invasion, they're forced to dig him up again, and is then taken to Kinshasa, where Mobutu's almost final act before he goes into exile is to burn the body of Habyarimana with, I think, a Buddhist priest or a Hindu priest. They couldn't find a Catholic around at the time to do the necessary. So even in death, poor old Habyarimana is, treated as a second-rate figure, while Lagat is at this point flying around the world, both enjoying life but also trying to raise money for the reinvasion of the country. So it's I think he has a pretty unhappy life, but he has a pretty unhappy death as well. One thing and another. Oh, you got one. There you go.
Thank you. First of all, just a short comment. I read your book 5 years ago, and I remember underlining a lot with questions. I don't remember all of them today, but it's a great book, so I recommend it. I was curious about the Akazu and its links to countries on the African continent, because we tend to, and myself, tend to focus a lot about Europe. We talk about France, we talk about Belgium, we talk about the UK, we talk about other countries. But sometimes when you read the list about fugitives, you also see that there is a lot on the African continent. And I'm curious about, is our focus on Europe in these discussions connected to that the top-notch Akazu hideout in Europe and the Western world? Or is it you're from there, I'm from there, some media is from there? Or are there actually an African perspective to this that we should discuss more, and where they actually would be scope for progress in terms of bringing people to justice? I mean, I've seen numbers sometimes, I don't remember them, by heart, showing that there's quite a lot of people also on the continent. But are they of the lower kind of grade, if you can grade people, or is it just more difficult? I mean, what's your thought on this issue if we move away a little bit from the most normal countries we discuss, i.e. France, Belgium, maybe UK? What's your thought on the African continent and the prospects to actually work on some of these countries to maybe bring a trend that eventually might also affect people or countries in Europe? Thank you.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because we do focus on, as you say, even the website focuses on, the European countries. Most of the wanted perpetrators of those 1,100 are in DRC, but also Uganda, West Africa, Southern Africa. What has been the sticking point? Well, in bringing them to justice, I think it's quite clear it's politics. Genocide, as the president pointed out on Sunday in his address, it's a political crime. It's You know, it's given an ethnic dimension, but its politics is the reason it was carried out. Akazu carried out the genocide in order to stay in power, and you pick a third group in order to pull the majority behind you. And if you have to eradicate that third group to stay in power, that's what they were prepared to do. Unfortunately, I mean, Habyarimana was very popular among Francophone leaders. Straight after the genocide, you see he's doing arms deals with Libya, with Gabon, with Togo. You end up with a lot ending up in Zimbabwe with Mugabe. Some head to South Africa. Really all over this continent. Wherever they know there was a friendly country to Habyarimana, Cameroon, these sort of dictators from West Africa were quite a popular destination. They knew they would be protected. They would not be handed over to the international court, and they would not stand trial. They could disappear into the communities. As time has gone on, and there's been sort of political rapprochement with a lot of these countries, that has led to then these countries suddenly waking up to the fact that these individuals are here, and they've extradited some of them. But it's been very much a slow process, and obviously for those in the DRC at the minute, I don't think the government in Kinshasa, it's high on its list to hand over these wanted individuals. So it sort of tends to rely on some political links, rapprochement between the governments. And it's sad that, for the sake of humanity, that it has to be like this, because you'd think if you have a war criminal or an individual on your territory who's done such terrible crimes, whatever you think of the current government, you would want that person to face justice. But unfortunately, it doesn't. They seem to be sort of either bargaining tools or just forgotten. But I think it's a really good point that, you know, most of these, the majority of these individuals, probably one level down from the Agats of this world, or two levels down, but still very important players, are hiding out in Africa, and justice is still certainly to come and find them.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for this book with many chapters we have to go through to understand very well. But what I was, so I would like to understand where the 80s in Rwanda, the role of the Akazu, or the beginning of Akazu. I think we have to know very well what happened those years in the 80s. We have the assassination of Mayuya. We have the coup organized by Rizinde and others. But also we have then other figures like Birara, who is still living. He was the governor of the National Bank. We have the phenomenon of tract. I don't know how to say it in English. Tract, yes, in Kigali. I think that is the beginning. Then Agathe and her family took the power, and Habyarimana was left as president, but really someone took the power inside the family, inside the then there is another aspect I would like to understand well, because the bidding of Akazu also has a financial aspect, business. It's the time when so Kabuga came after in 90s, I think, but Akazu also has the side of business. Even the I think all marriage between the Akazu family with the businessmen and the other powerful men in Rwanda also has to do with the Akazu. Those marriage between the daughters of Kabuga and the sons of Habyarimana and others. So I would like to understand why this, the building, the basis of this Akazu, talking about different aspects, financial, business, but also the power, and also I don't believe that everything has been written. The coup d'etat. Do you believe that there was a coup d'etat, or is something which was? So the 80s for me is key to understand where the 90s and the genocide, 1994. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that's you really answered your point, because I think you're spot on there. I think again the 80s sort of disappear. With the focus of everything is always 1994. We jump into 1994 as if there was always going to be a genocide. There was no other way. There was going to be a genocide, and we sort of. It's very easy with history. You look back and you just say, well, yes, these things were obviously going to happen. It wasn't clear in 1980 that there would be a genocide here in 1994. But as the 80s went on, and this group became more and more powerful and more rich, they basically had more and more to lose. And that was only possible, as you rightly said, through slowly these clan marriages going on between the Habyarimana family and other powerful businessmen, and building this base in the military with the head of the military, Sarabuga Raga Falita, the head of the gendarmerie, and this sort of deep, incestuous links throughout society. And I think that's, the 80s, I would encourage anyone here to look at the 80s, to research the 80s, because I think they're a fascinating decade here. And I said that, I mean, this country by 1990 was known as the Switzerland of Africa. As far as the international community was concerned, this was one of the best led countries in Africa. This had it all going for it. It was the land of 1,000 hills. Diane Fossey, okay, she was murdered in 1988, but up to that point, you know, this was bliss. In fact, in 1988, Habyarimana had a lovely big glossy book, a coffee book, and you can read it. It was published in Belgium, full of glowing pictures and hardworking Rwandans, and everything, it seemed, was rosy in the garden. And how looks are deceptive. And again, who would have thought when this coffee table book hit the coffee table in 1988 that you know, less than 5-6 years later, 1 million people would be lying dead. And you know, so the 80s are really important to look at. And I would also encourage you to look at, and there's been some excellent work here on the role of the churches. Now I know that's controversial, but certainly almost each of the churches, whether Catholic or Protestant, was so important in those days. This is a day before, I mean, in a way it's a joyful day, it was before media. Rwanda doesn't get a television station going till sort of late 1991 too. There's no television, it's all done by radio or newspaper, what news there is. And of course, with literacy rates so poor, and people not affording radios in the 80s, a lot of it was disseminated from the pulpits. So the church was really important. And if you controlled the church, as Habyarimana worked it out, then you were well on the way to having an excellent propaganda mouthpiece. So the role of the church is essential. The archbishops, who are effectively appointed by Habyarimana. And as time goes on, obviously into the genocide, sadly, a lot of the church are complicit as well. And I should say that obviously there's a lot of clergy don't died for their parishioners. So that is not a clear picture, but it's sad to note that several of these senior clergy have stood trial for genocide.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Wallace, for the talk today, as well as for taking us through the presentation of the website. Sorry, my name is Marvin. I haven't had a chance to read your book yet, but I'm looking forward to it. I have one specific question on the title. What came into coming up with the title "Stepped in Blood"? And more specifically, why stepped is spelt the way it is. Thank you.
That is a superb question. It's never been asked before, and I always forget to answer it because it's never asked. People have said steeped in blood and stepped in blood, and it does look a very strange title. And it was suggested to me by a friend, an editor in London, and it is... Can anyone know where it possibly comes from? You get a prize, you get a free cup of coffee. No, I can't be more generous than that. Where's our English lady? She's gone. Right, it's from Shakespeare. Shakespeare's Macbeth. Now, Shakespeare's Macbeth, you may not all know, but basically he was very similar to poor old Habyarimana, i.e., he was put up to it by his wife, the dreadful Lady Macbeth. And he murders Banquo, one of his supporters, friends, rivals, and then he gets further and further into this bloodbath. And towards the end of the play, Macbeth says, "I am in blood, stepped in so far that to return would be as difficult as to go on." And that, I think, is Habyarimana. By 1994, he has stepped in blood so far, there's no way out. These bloodbaths have been going on in the 90s, 91, 92, 93, so he's just got to keep going with it. The genocide has got to continue. And in fact, it takes an even worse turn, as we know. But yeah, so it's a quote from Macbeth, which I think is Macbeth. The figures of Macbeth and his wife immediately sprung to mind when I first came across the story of Rwanda. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Diane Swanga, and my question is a bit personal, and I want to bring it in today's context. So we know, of course, Akazu was influential, they did stuff, but they also have offspring. And some of them are clinging to that ideology and those ideas. So my question is, how has this work affected you socially and professionally?
Right, I didn't see that one coming. Well, I'm still sitting here, and I'm still talking about it, which in itself is an achievement, all these years later. It's very strange. I think we have a lot of francophone researchers, and we've been treated to a lot of them this past week. In fact, talking, and the wonderful Dupaquier who was here, Jean-François a bit earlier, Eric Gillet was here, and they've been working on this, and they have quite a good support network themselves. In England, in the UK. I think it's very much an anomaly, trying to explain to people, what do you do? They think you're going to be a plumber, or, you work in a bookshop or whatever. And you say to them, well, I write books about the Rwandan genocide against the Tutsi. You can imagine the reaction is, sort of raised eyebrow, quickly followed by what's on television tonight. Because they just don't know what to say to that. So sometimes it's quite a lonely job, because you are very much, you feel, on your own. And you're in a country that really doesn't take genocide seriously, not just in justice, but in any other way. We had Brexit for a reason, is because we struggle to get on with anyone else in the world, I think. So, you know, it's a sort of British mentality is also sort of, you know, we just don't talk about these sort of things. So it's absolutely fabulous to be back with people who do want to talk about such subjects. And yes, they are incredibly painful. And when I talk to survivors, you know, you feel like you want to go out the room and cry for a day. And I've got many survivor friends in the UK, and they are absolutely wonderful people. And goodness alone knows how they are still living the lives they live. You know, I mean, it makes me emotional just thinking about it. But so that's why I do it. Long time ago, when I first came here, I went up to Bisesero, and I remember speaking to survivors up there, and they were talking about the failure of justice and their lives now and everything. And I said, look, I can't do anything, but the one thing I can do is try and maybe research and try to make your story known. And if I can do that, I will. And so that's a sort of promise to me as much as them. So that's where we are. Whether I've achieved anything, I'm not sure, but that's, you know, we keep going. Thank you.
But on the side of the ideology of genocide was not a creation of the Akazu. It existed. They just, yeah. It started in 1959. It did not begin with Akazu. It was there. The templates were there. They simply brought it up again. If you look at these newsprints, Kangura was part of Akazu. It was financed by Nsengiyumva, Umurava, and others. There are so many. Look at the list of those who were financing RTLM. It's the family. Then Niriva Mundas, who was the son-in-law of Habyarimana.
Oh, absolutely. I think they used what Kayibanda had very kindly set out for them, and before in 59, 60, 61, 62.
And I think it was even the best man of when Habyarimana got married. I think I have pictures. Was his best man, yes. Kayibanda.
They were best friends till Habyarimana murdered him. Yeah.
Yep.
One quick one from me. You did mention we keep learning about these genocidaire fugitives from the media. And I want to hear your perspective as an outsider who has been really following these people up. What do you think we haven't done right to, really build our own community quorum of, I'd call it a version of Nazi hunters, people that will be trying to find these genocidaires and actively, looking for them. Because I feel like you said, it's only in the media that we see them.
Well, I think the media reaction to these genocides has been, really you can trace it back to the genocide itself. It's been low-key, let's put it mildly. In 1994, the big events of that year, what was the big event of April 1994? Mandela, no, that was May, but it was sort of, that was the big event of May, which is very good. Anyone has a big event of April 1994? Where were the world's press? What were they interested in? O.J. Simpson? No, O.J. Simpson is a bit later in the year. That takes up to June, July, so, yeah. Mandela, no? Come on, there must be some young people here, surely. There's someone. Huh? World Cup? No. Well, it might have been. No. There's a lot of guesses. I'm not hearing what I want to hear, though. There must be someone here who is into their music. Yes, Arusha Jamboree at the back there has got it. Yeah, Kurt Cobain, the lead singer of Nirvana, shot himself. Beginning of April, and that is where the world's media were. This great grunge artist. And that's where the press were focused, as ever with personality, this big American star. It was news. and plane crashes in Africa, African bloodshed, really wasn't very interesting. So the media's been, I think, quite consistent. I mean, it is interesting to see, as I said, during the genocide, there were some journalists here, especially when the French came, some French journalists came with them. But the main journalists get involved in the camps. And what's interesting is, even then, the journalists are not here. So Rwanda now, you know, after July, half the population is in these camps on the borders. But Rwanda is left. It's got not a penny farthing left. There's not a franc left in the exchequer. They've taken the whole exchequer. They've taken all the transport. There's no cars left. I mean, Tom knows because he was, you know, I'm sure some of you know what the place was like then. You know, it was devoid of almost everything. It was a country full of bodies with no police, with no judiciary, with no administration. International help didn't want to come to start with because of the security issue. So, you know, where is the media in all there? Well, it wasn't here. It was across the border with the refugees. Even then, Rwanda didn't deserve media coverage. And I think going forwards, the media has very short memories. It's always on to the next tragedy. You know, it loves a good tragedy, and once initial tragedy is sort of worn off a bit, we're on to the next one. Absolutely. And, you know, certainly Arusha, the trials in Arusha, the ICTR never really got the media coverage it needed, and it should have done, which is very sad. Whereas I think if you look at how the genocide, you know, if you want to say ethnic cleansing in Serbia, Bosnia, how that was treated, where they had the peacekeepers, but also at The Hague, they had the media coverage. The trials there were covered. They were in newspapers in the West. And unsurprisingly, the leaders there were tracked down much quicker. And in fact, all of them are now, you know, they have everyone they need, unlike Rwanda, where there's still, say, more than 1,000 wanted.
We'll have one last comment, one last question. Yes.
Andrew, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your sustained interest in Rwanda and in the ordeal that this country has gone through, from your first book, The Silent Accomplice, and your second book, and also your continued interest in what is happening with those acquitted from Arusha. I know that you follow very keenly those who are now in Niger, and also what's going on with the UK5, the genocide suspects that the UK has refused to extradite. I also want to thank you very particularly for not being a diva, because you do excellent work. You ask for nothing in return, and I want to thank you for your genuine interest and your care, and for your modesty, and for asking for nothing in return for telling this story. So I just wanted to say thank you very much, and you're very much appreciated.
Thank you. I'm not going to comment on that, but, well, I am. I was going to say thank you so much. It's most kind.
Do you have any last thoughts for us?
Okay, let me end with a story which is in here, and it's only very brief, but it's on my sort of theme tonight. And it's one I think sort of sums a lot of things up, and if I can find the right part. I confess it's a while since I've looked at this book, actually, so I'm trying to find where everything is. Can I help with the mic? Yes, there we go. Oh, 2 mics. No, you're going to... Oh, very good, thank you. Thank you, Alia. This is so smart. Okay, should I just read? I'll just read it, I think. You can have a little book reading. 2 years after President Clinton's apology, on Friday, the 14th of July, 1995, the UN Secretary General Boutros Boutros-Ghali made his own Rwandan pilgrimage of remorse. Unlike the American president, he chose to do so by helicopter at the site of a massacre. At the church compound in Naya Buyi, where up to 20,000 were slaughtered at the instigation of the Burgmeister, into Hamwe and Nafar, the elderly, hunched figure of Boutros Ghali placed a wreath by a pile of human remains. He then addressed an assembled group of survivors sitting in the dusty red earth at the bottom of the church steps. He admitted to the failure of the UN to protect them and promised that the international community had not forgotten them and that the perpetrators would be punished. The guilty would not escape. As he turned to leave, escorted by 3 burly UN bodyguards, the 75-year-old UN General Secretary shouted in French to the traumatized, grief and poverty-stricken survivors, "Courage, courage, courage." It was the best the UN chief could give them. 3 more empty words. Once the elderly politician had left, the survivors talked among themselves. "At least he came," one said, and expressed sorrow. "Yes, that is true," someone else says. But he did not listen. He did not ask any of the survivors to speak. They know the murderers' names. The survivors need justice now as much as they need bread. And they do not believe they will get it.
Mine is working.
No, I think it's a great, well, it's not a story, it's sort of a fable really, but justice has to go hand in hand with subsistence, because mentally and emotionally, to move forward with your life, you cannot carry on if you're seeing impunity all around you. And I think for survivors, that's the one thing we can still give, is to have the people who killed their loved ones in a dock so they can look them in the eye and ask why. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Andrew Wallis. Thank you all. And please don't forget to visit the website Rwanda Justice 4, the number 4, genocide.org.uk. Thank you.